You're Free to Go is sponsored by Milburn Men's Clothing, where top athletes shop for sharp, tailored style. And whether Mark and I are in the studio or the courtroom, Milburn dresses us for success. Mention YFTG and get 10% off at Milburn Men's Clothing, which has been providing the finest in men's clothing and suits since 1946. Call 651 645 2922 or visit www.milburn.com. Welcome back, everybody, to You're Free to Go. Glad to have you with us today, and I'm thankful for modern technology because while I'm here in Boca Raton, Florida, we have no idea where Marc Nurick is, but I can tell you he's not in Florida and he's not in LA, so let's see if we can put him on screen and figure out where Marc Nurick is. Hey, buddy, welcome. You're looking good.
How are you?
Where are you,
I'm
bud?
up in Heavenly Valley at the Heavenly Valley Ski Resort, where it's 50-something degrees, and I wasn't sure if I'd be skiing or surfing. Uh, but our listeners should know I'm not a particularly great skier, but you are an expert skier, a former ski instructor. Where were you a ski instructor?
Aspen Mountain, between college and law school. I took off
Wow.
a few years and taught snow skiing there and actually snowboarding, which I prefer. So, but it looks like you have a pretty good base of snow there.
Yeah, it's all right. I mean, it
Yeah.
just gets a little slushy in the afternoon.
Yeah.
But it's skiing, so you
Yeah.
can't beat it.
I'm very jealous. I'm jealous. Well, I know you want to get back on the slope, so we're gonna make this a pretty quick episode today. It's a really special episode for our fans out there. Marc, if you'll indulge me, give me a moment to set the stage for our fans, I'd appreciate it. Okay.
Sure.
Thanks. So, our fans already know the kind of the brand or the format of our show, but we have a lot of new watchers, listeners, viewers coming on every week. So let me let you guys know, the new fans that are on today for the first time. Our format is Marc and I talk about our cases. We tell you what's going on behind the scenes in our criminal cases, how the case unfolded, why judges ruled the way they did, what the verdicts were, and all the things that people want to know that you don't read about in the news. So that's what we typically do. But every once in a while, we'll deviate from that. You know, we're different from like a journalist on Dateline or other true crime podcasts that talk about other people's cases. We talk about our cases, but we do deviate once in a while from that. And we'll have an episode with a guest on it. We'll have episodes where we just talk about bloopers, crazy, funny things that happen in the courtrooms. And we'll even have episodes where we talk about legal issues like search and seizure. So we try to make it somewhat educational, somewhat entertaining and interesting. Well, today is one of those special days where we're going to deviate from our tradition of talking about our cases. And we're going to talk about, let's call this a special edition episode, where we're going to talk about a very, very hot topic in the news right now. And it's going to be about the Savannah Guthrie kidnapping of her mother. We also need to thank our engineer, Ben, who owns Podcast Junkies. He's allowing us to come in on a Saturday and record because everyone's talking about this case. We wanted to get on the air about it as quickly as possible. So Ben made a special accommodation for us so we can get in today on a Saturday. So thank you, Ben. Appreciate you always. And we're going to do a great show for you. And really the highlight of our show is that we have a lieutenant here today, Lieutenant Kimsel, you're going to hear from in a few minutes, who has a very extensive background. We're going to let you share his bio. He'll share his bio with you all in a second when we introduce him. But this is a really important time for you viewers and listeners to understand what's going on in that case. But before we do anything, before I introduce the lieutenant, I wanted to make it clear that Lieutenant Kimsel is not here on behalf of any police agency. He's here on his own behalf. He's going to be speaking from his own experience and training, cases that he's worked on that give him insight that allow him to be a guest here today to opine on what he's heard in the news. He has no connection to the Savannah Guthrie kidnapping of her mother case whatsoever. He may expand on that as well. But he has a wealth of experience in this field of investigations and trying to solve, kidnappings and so forth. So he's going to be a very special guest on this special episode today. Before I introduce him, for those of you that may be living out of the country the last 6 weeks or so, Savannah Guthrie, who we all know from the Today Show, very famous, internationally acclaimed journalist, her mother, Nancy Guthrie, at 84 years old, was kidnapped out of her home, which is located near Tucson, Arizona. The kidnapping occurred around February 1st, possibly the 2nd. She was last seen on February 1st. She hasn't been seen yet. And we sit here today, we're around March 13th, March 14th. Today's the 14th. And so it's been a couple months now, and the investigation is ongoing. So without further ado, if we can put Marc back up on the screen and also bring our honored guest, Lieutenant Kimsel, to introduce himself. We're honored to have you, Lieutenant. Thanks for being here.
Thank you. Thanks to both of you and to the studio as well. And thank you, Guy, for that introduction. I hope I live up to the hype.
Well, the truth is, I was at your swearing in as a lieutenant, and it was standing room only. There were at least 500 plus people there, and I had no idea of your accolades and your success over the years. I always knew you were a highly respected officer of the law, because I've been in this field for 34 years, is about the same time as you. So I always knew you, was aware of you, saw your work, but it was a real honor to be at that swearing in. And Marc and I are honored that you agreed to come on the show today. Maybe you'll share with our viewers a little bit about your background, because I know it can take, from being at that ceremony, I know we could spend an hour and a half on your background. So maybe you could just summarize it for our listeners before we get into this case.
Well, if I never told you before, I will definitely hire you if I ever need a criminal defense attorney, because your appeal to the masses is doesn't go unnoticed. So thank you again for the kind words. Yes, my background, about 30 years in law enforcement. I spent half of that, well, a little less than half, in the northeast part of the U.S., working primarily drug investigations, narcotics, undercover, did a lot of wiretap cases, stuff like that. I call that my previous life. It was a whole different lifestyle for me back then. I came down to Florida about 20 years ago. Been working here since. I still currently work. Like you alluded to, I was promoted last year to lieutenant. I currently oversee four investigative units, probably about 35 detectives, and their first-line supervisors, and a couple civilians. So certainly have an extensive background, anything from drug activity and narcotics cases to homicide investigations to thefts, burglaries, auto thefts, pretty much everything. And some have been very intense and long-term cases. Others have been, luck goes a long way, and sometimes we wrap them up quickly, but very familiar with a lot of different types of cases.
So, and do you have the opportunity to work on task force with like federal agencies or other law enforcement agencies around the country?
Yes, I have. I've worked, again, in my previous employment, I worked with one or two different federal task forces involving gangs, drug work down here. I've worked with a county task force that's pretty expansive. It actually goes through several different counties of the south, eastern and southwestern part of the state. So I've worked with them too in different types of crimes. Yeah.
All right, good. Well, we'll start to get into it, because I know you've investigated unsolved at the moment. You're investigating, someone's gone missing. I remember one where someone at a resort had gone missing. They wound up being found in the marina. Mm-hmm. So I know that's part of what you do, is when people go missing. So obviously we have a case here where the mother of Savannah Guthrie, who, again, 84 years old, went missing. So I think our viewers want to know, what are police doing behind the scenes? How do they investigate cases like this? Is it on the internet? Are they going online looking? Are they knocking on doors? What exactly do police do? And again, I told the viewers, you are not involved in this case whatsoever. You're here speaking from your experience of handling unsolved kind of kidnappings and so forth.
Yeah, so to that point, every case, if it's somebody finds a credit card and they charge it fraudulently, or, unfortunately somebody may find a body in an alley and it's an identified person. There's basics, right? Who, what, where, when, why, how, the basics of investigations, which you are very familiar with. So that doesn't change. But to your question specifically, I mean, it's knocking on doors for sure. It's trying to attain video, and some of this has already been done in that case. That they've publicly released. It's also, what do they have that they're not sharing publicly because it's an intricate part of the investigation, or they want to keep it private to further the investigation. And there's going to be, physical evidence is your best, but to acquire physical evidence, you need to do the background, I'll call it, part of the investigation, which is, boots on the ground, knocking on doors, checking for video, checking for license plates. checking for persons of interest once they develop and stuff like that. So it's actually a combination of that. And specific to this case, from what I've heard, on the news and the media, which, obviously we have to take with a grain of salt, but this came directly from some of the sources actually investigating, is there was, and probably still is, a good amount of manpower allocated, both federal, local, and probably county. So they have, that's another thing, they would all pool their resources. Like a local jurisdiction, depending on its size, may not have what a larger jurisdiction or their county has. So they pull all those together to utilize them.
When they do that, is there any competition among them, or are they all rowing in the same direction?
Well,
and this is the behind the scenes that I want to know.
So, a lot of cops are A personalities, and you want to be right, or you want to be the person that cracks the case. Other people will do the work and not take the credit, and it's the bigger picture. So probably, yes, inherently there is, quote, competition. I think that goes, like, in a person in my position as a supervisor, I would check in, routinely and make sure that our egos are not taking over the case.
Right.
It's about police work. I always said through the years, and I worked, again, multi-jurisdictional cases with cities, counties, federal agencies, state agencies, whatever. To me, it was, we all just want to get the bad guy or the bad girl or solve the case. That's
Right.
what it's about. And whoever's name is in the headlines or at the front of the podium, it's a group effort. We know that if you've collectively worked them. And if the person that wants their name in the lights wants to take it, go ahead. I was okay with that, and I still am. But as a supervisor now, I would monitor it and make sure that wasn't a thing, because you don't want that to become the focal point of the case.
Right. No, I get that. That's a human perspective, the human
Right,
influence. How about the other? Like, I remember from some movies, people an oldie but goodie, The Fugitive, where the local agency's investigating, but then the feds come in and the feds say, hey, we're taking this investigation over. You guys don't have any say anymore. We're in charge. So does that come into play too?
Yeah, I think that'll happen, and I think primarily based on kind of what I mentioned. I can't think of a town off the top of my head, but if a small town of maybe 15, like let's say Highland Beach, which is a local jurisdiction with a small police department, if a major incident happened there, they would almost have to rely on other
Right.
people for help. But as far as somebody coming in and taking over, I mean, I'm sure it's happened.
Right.
I can't think really of a time where I've personally witnessed it, but I'm sure it would happen.
But I think you're right. A small agency would welcome that help because they don't have the resources, the tools, the training, the staff to handle it. So the sheriff's office helps them out, the federal agency. So yeah. And what about and Ben? Is there any way to put all three of us on the screen? Is that possible? Because I know it's kind of hard for Marc to jump in, but okay, no way to do that. All right. So
All right. Well, I do have a couple of questions.
yeah.
I mean, as we've laid the base now for how these things develop, I'm curious about this particular case and its unique aspect in that, correct me if I'm wrong, but wasn't there a ransom demand initially?
Yeah, there was.
Yeah, that was reported. Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
more than one, I think.
So typically I've been involved as a prosecutor in prosecuting kidnapping cases in the past, usually with drug dealers kidnapping other drug dealers. But typically, when you have a ransom demand, that's one of the ways that law enforcement can try to catch on to who's behind it. But then all of a sudden, the ransom demands stop if they were at all connected to the people or person who abducted her. So, what can you tell us from your vast experience about that? The fact that there was one or two ransom demands and then it stopped.
Well, I think you bring up an interesting point, because that example you cited of, a drug dealer, maybe, quote, kidnapping another drug dealer looking for a ransom, oftentimes police may not be involved, and that usually gets paid, or sometimes it doesn't, and the outcome kind of is predictable. But I think in today's world, I think what happens is, and this may have been the case in Miss Guthrie's disappearance, I don't know if they can validate it. Unfortunately, with the dark web, with the availability of hiding your identity via online techniques and using IP addresses that route through China and India and Russia and not only are they used for fraud and stuff like that, but in a case like this, they can create a whole thing. And I think from what, I remember when it was reported specific to this case, I remember they cited that the ransom notes went to like the news outlets and I think TMZ. And they're like, how come the family's not notified? And that maybe that's a reason why. Maybe they didn't validate it. And if they want Bitcoin or some type of cryptocurrency, that's almost impossible to trace. So those factors, I'm not saying they're not being investigated. They can be, but eventually, if you hit an IP address where the host server company is not going to share their information, it's kind of, unfortunately, it's a dead end. So, in going back to your reference, if person A is holding up person B and they know each other, it's a little harder, it's a little easier to kind of track and maintain. But when it comes to these layered third, fourth party IP addresses that are buried in Eastern Europe, it's a little bit more difficult to validate. And that may be part of the reason.
I also want
It's very possible that in this situation, those ransom demands came from people unassociated not associated with the actual abduction. And that's why they stopped, because there was no proof of life or anything that further on. And may very well be that the abduction never was part of a kidnapping ransom.
Yeah, I would say, without the first-hand knowledge, but I mean, it's a distinct possibility. And we don't know what else they have behind those ransoms, but yeah, and especially with the proof of life aspect, I think that's something as a family, if you're the family of the victim, how do you feel about it? And do you hesitate to act because of that, as well? I don't know.
Right.
Yeah, I want to jump in here too. I have some experience in this area, both as a former prosecutor and defense, where ransoms were involved. And look, every case is different. Wherever you are in the world could be different. Mm-hmm. But in my experience on this issue of ransom, I've often been discouraged with when a victim's family is trying to put up ransom. Law enforcement has often discouraged those clients to put up ransom, and here's why. They say there's a lot of cultures, like in South America, where kidnappings are very common and ransom is paid, and that encourages the kidnappings, and they don't want that to happen in the United States. If you start paying ransoms, it's going to become a lot more common where people are going to get kidnapped. And by the way, in these foreign countries or South America and so forth, they don't kidnap the rich person. They kidnap their children, or maybe an 84-year-old woman. I haven't seen that, but a child, because then the rich person can pay. If you kidnap the rich person, how's the child going to get the money available? But it's really common. So not only has that been in my experience where my clients who were victims were discouraged from putting up a ransom because they don't want that to become prevalent in the United States, but I actually, taking it a few steps further, have had experience with the TV show everyone knows, America's Most Wanted, John Walsh, who started that show after his son, Adam Walsh, was kidnapped in 1985. So working with Walsh, they'll offer rewards for any information that leads to a arrest and conviction, but they often present it, and I have dealt with this with clients, where the show is presenting the award. They're very careful about presenting it so it looks like, well, it's coming from America's Most Wanted, not necessarily the family, because again, they don't want to create this problem where people are, with a criminal mind are sitting around in the United States thinking, oh, we're going to just start kidnapping people and we'll get a quick 50 grand, 100 grand, and what have you. So that's one perspective. Maybe the family, maybe it was connected with, the other thing I do want to share is that if you were to put up ransom, and this is no, comment on Savannah or her family, but look, $1 million isn't going to get someone to come forward and say who did this. $1 million is a lot of money, but everyone knows it doesn't go that far, and the person coming forward knows their life is going to be in danger if they come forward. But I'll tell you what, if you wanted to go down the ransom, you put $10 million out there, you put $15 million out there, and that's going to get people to come forward, because there's going to be a neighbor who saw or heard something, there's going to be a family member who knows something, and they're going to say, you know what, I'm willing to take the chance for 15 million or 10 million. That's just my personal thoughts on it, Lieutenant. But I'm not a big fan. I don't think anyone should put out ransom, because I do think it could become a problem. People talk about like the first 24 hours or so of. Can you address that? Is that really crucial, or is that just a TV show, movie type concept, that the first 24 hours are crucial in an investigation like this?
Well, I still firmly believe that. But to touch on some things we spoke about earlier, with things, electronic data, videos, things that are stored in clouds, that you can access, it's still pertinent. You can still gather a good amount of data in that respect, at least, past that. But as far as the physical evidence and trying to track movements and trying to, if you develop a suspect in a short amount of time, to track that person, that 24 or 48 hours is vital. That show, the first 48 on TV, is actually, a lot of it's solved before that, and then some it goes into weeks and months. But it is vital to get that information in that time frame. Yeah, because these cases go cold, and if you hit a blockade or a brick wall in a case, you kind of get frustrated, and you have to, and then that's when you would go back and redevelop what you have and reanalyze it, and sometimes that takes repeated efforts to get it going again. But yeah, that time frame is definitely vital, for sure. Yeah. Yep, for sure.
And what about earlier, really, when you just, your introduction, when you started kind of talking about what's going on behind the scenes, you just alluded to, information that police may have that they don't release. Now, Marc and I and you, we've been in this industry a long time, and I understand that's really, really key, that the police, when they're giving press conference, they don't tell everything. And there's a reason for that. My understanding is, let's say in this scenario, well, let me back up. The people often call in and they think they have a tip, they think they have some information. And one way to figure out if that information is really valid or not, or how much value to give it, is if they share something with law enforcement that no one in the public knows. So for example, if you go to a situation and you find the dead body and there's an earring missing on that person, and someone and you don't release that information to anyone in the world, and someone calls in and says, hey, I know about this, and you say, well, how do you know? Give me some proof. Well, I know that there was an earring missing, right?
Right.
Is there more behind it as to why officers and law enforcement, when they give press conferences, don't release all the information to the public? Is that the main reason?
I mean, I see it as the main reason, as being in the investigative side for so long, as opposed to I'll call it the front of the house or the podium side, as far as, because in a lot of cases, I think people that do give the statements are guided a little bit too by not only the investigators, at least they should, the chiefs of police or the sheriffs or whoever it is, they should seek guidance as to, what could we release, what could we not. And in my experience, they always have. So, but yeah, there's definitely reasons. And you touched on one, little intricate details that the press may not release. And let's face it, in today's world, if somebody doesn't know something, they want to know why, and years ago it wasn't like that, but it's instant now, and who knows more quicker. I've been a proponent of well, we can release, what we have and what we need to, and each department has their own parameters and stuff and expectations too, but yeah, it's 100% in the benefit of the investigation, and you have to look in the big picture. So the press or the public or somebody or an attorney or whoever may take personal offense that you're not releasing more information, but you look at it from the victim and their family, like we're working for them. We want this case closed for them. And if that means somebody may get mad because they don't know enough, okay, so be it. So there's definitely details that are held back for a reason. Right. And I always say, when the case is closed, especially in Florida, because their public record laws are pretty broad, you'll have everything, but while it's being worked, I mean, it's kind of ours until then,
How about if things get leaked? Because I know in my experience, investigative reporters are incredible. I don't know how they get their information, what resources, what sources they're using, but things do get leaked. And if you're in the position of investigating an unsolved crime, that's got to be really frustrating.
It's 100% frustrating. It happens. It happens more broad-based than specifics. But yes, things do get leaked, or descriptions, or methods, or stages, let's call it, of investigations to get leaked. Like, like let's use a case where it's hot and heavy for maybe a week, and then it's kind of quiet, and then somebody may say, oh well, this just came in, and then it generates again. So it's very frustrating.
Yeah.
And it could be a deterrent sometimes, obviously, which is a problem.
Right. Yeah, of course. And now, is there times where you may want to actually put information out there that may not be true, but there's a reason you kind of want to put some information out there, maybe thinking that the perpetrator might think, oh, now I'm out of the clear. Oh, we're looking at this guy who the person went to school with, when the real perpetrator had nothing to do with going to school. Maybe they'll start to slip up thinking, oh, they're not on my trail anymore. And will you put little information like that out, to a red herring or something like that?
Next question. No. So, I mean, whatever techniques there are. I mean, you have to be creative,
Right.
and especially if the case is getting, colder, or it's a severe case, or it turns into it happened once, now it's a similar case, then, like that kind of thing, you want it solved. So you have to, you get creative, 100%.
Right.
Yeah.
Let's talk about a controversial aspect of this whole thing. Obviously, this is a horrible tragedy,
Mhm.
and everybody is sympathetic to the Guthrie family. But, a lot of people, a lot of commentators, and a lot of people just on the street are talking about the fact that, were it not the mother of a very famous person, the resources that have been committed, the enormous resources that have been committed to this investigation, wouldn't be there. So, you've worked on local matters where I'm sure, it didn't involve high profile celebrities. And sometimes, how do you get the manpower mobilized? For example, even getting the feds involved. Would they be involved typically in a local kidnapping? Let's say the situation occurred here in South Florida. Somebody's mother, God forbid, was taken.
Mhm.
Would the FBI typically get involved in something like that?
I would say yes. I think if you present it in the right fashion, and you're soliciting resources or assistance, I mean, they're a nationwide agency, or actually international agency. So yes, in certain cases, I don't see why they wouldn't. I can't cite a specific case out of memory where specific to like this one where it was a kidnapping and we got involved. But I know that even bank robberies, I worked bank robbery cases, and they were involved. And a lot of times they would even take lead prosecution. So yeah, and I appreciate your reference. I mean, that's another, I think, thing of modern day society in general, be it the media, social media. And here, the ironic thing is the victim's family, she's in the media. So, yeah, I think that plays part of it too. And people will allude to that. But I could tell you, again, firsthand from my experience, and it's extensive, and it's in a couple different agencies. We collectively have always done everything we could for anybody, and if we needed outside resources to get it done, we would. And again, it's natural, it's human nature. Some people the perception is, well, they're getting it special treatment or whatever, but I think it's case by case, but it's also, if the resources are needed and you're soliciting them properly, I don't see why you wouldn't get them, no matter who.
Well, that's great. That's
Yeah.
great for our listeners to know. I'm
Yeah.
happy you reassured us about that.
But what's
Thank you.
interesting about this, is that if there's a kidnapping, and for whatever reason that the local authorities feel like they have the right resources to investigate, and the kidnapping is in the news once at the very beginning, and that's the extent of it, and they feel like they don't need to bring other resources, great, to help solve it. But at the same time, there's an advantage to it becoming newsworthy and being able to bring in all these other resources to help solve it. But there's also a huge disadvantage. The more that case is in the news, the more calls you guys are going to get. Now, and I know you have to run down every call, and you could get thousands of phone calls. I've worked on these high profile cases where the Town Center Mall murder cases. There were thousands of calls that came into the police department, and you guys have to chase all of them down. And many of them come from psychics, right? That say, oh, I got a feeling, I heard a voice in my head. And a lot of that can be very distracting to the investigation and get you looking at the other things that really aren't necessary or aren't accurate, appropriate, and so forth. So in a case like this, don't you think they're probably getting thousands of phone calls now because of the high profile nature of it?
I'm sure, and yeah, that goes to what we talked about earlier about what do you release and what do you not release and why, and also, yes, I'm sure they are getting a lot of calls because once they put out vehicles or physical descriptions or
Yeah.
then you're going to get those calls. Any public place, oh, it looks like that person. I think it's that person. And you know what? Cases have been solved that way too, though.
Yep.
So they need to be worked. It's frustrating for the investigators because, they may hit a lot of dead ends, but then that one time, they work it and it pans out. So, but yeah, to your 100%, there's definitely an elevated level of activity around the more publicity it gets and the more they share. But that could help too.
Right.
That could help too.
Well, yeah, like you said, reminded me of, I heard that exact expression from John Walsh from America's Most Wanted. He'll do these cold cases that are literally 15 years old, 20 years old. And he's like, the reason we're airing this case is because we're going to get more eyes, more ears on this, and cases get solved. I don't remember the statistics, but if anyone wants to go Google America's Most Wanted and how many cases they've solved years later, it's pretty successful. So your point is 100% accurate.
Yeah.
You did reference a cold case earlier. Can you, what is the law enforcement, what do they view a cold, how do they define cold case? Or when does a case become cold?
Well, it's a generalized statement, but some agencies have guidelines or policies of what they determine to be a quote cold case, specifically if they have a cold case unit like larger agencies would. And but if a case, like I said, you start with basics, you start working it. Once you get some hits, you keep carrying the case, and then eventually you may hit a dead end. Now you may close the case out pending further leads, or if depending on the nature of the case, like a case like Miss Guthrie here, I don't think that'll ever be closed until she's found or somebody's arrested or both. But it goes, quote cold. It's just a general statement, but like I said, it depends on the degree of what type of case it is.
Yeah.
But it could go cold, based on lack of information, or you just kind of hit a dead end, for lack of a better expression, and then you have to reinvigorate the case and get more creative, and that's maybe also when you seek help from other agencies. We're blessed today in law enforcement to have the sharing capabilities we do.
Right.
We can create flyers, and you may have a criminal analyst or somebody to help you, or a whole unit dedicated to it, and you create a flyer and you distribute that via email, regionally, nationally, whatever. And as a matter of fact, I'll just tell one quick story. I worked a case where I had a very specific suspect in a case, and about a week after this was a woman. She was charged in my case. When I was a detective, her picture came across a flyer from another agency, and I was like, well, I know who that is. So I called the detective immediately, and he ended up closing a good number of cases based on that. So that's a big help, and the information sharing, it definitely helps.
Yeah.
Is there a central depository that has information other than just sending emails out? Like you see in some of these TV shows,
Yeah.
somebody at a computer.
There's plenty. I mean, the state of Florida has a fusion center. It's based in Tallahassee. I believe it's run by FDLE and some other agencies. The state agencies. Nationally, they have exploited children. They have all these databases for child predators, missing kids, and then they have different types of programs that monitor violent felons or murder suspects, and they have it narrowed down to certain criteria, based on certain crimes. So yeah, there's a lot of databases available that, you may have the parameters without a specific suspect, but it helps almost a reverse match. So like I said, between the technology, the data sharing, it really helps. It really does.
Yeah, and they also have, for our viewers to learn, if someone gets arrested and we the law enforcement take their DNA, they collect their DNA. There's a national database called CODIS, and I've had cases where someone had a knock on their door, and the law enforcement said, "You're a suspect in a rape case." and we're here to take your DNA. And they're like, well, I didn't rape anybody. They give them the DNA, and 2 weeks later they come back and get arrested. Somehow their DNA was in CODIS and matched an unsolved sex crime, and so that's a huge database as well.
Yep.
So, when you talk about cold cases, I want to note for our viewers, when a case is considered cold, does that mean the file is being closed and it's being put back on a shelf somewhere and maybe 10 years later someone will look at it? Or does it go to a different department in law enforcement agencies where someone specializes in cold cases?
Well, like I said, I think that goes to, the type of agency you work for and the types of units they have. Like a larger agency, like a big city, I'm sure that, they have dedicated cold case detectives or cold case units. Smaller agencies, they may not have that, but they may file it away. And I think the most common, at least from my experience, the most common thing is you may hit a dead end or several, and you may, quote, close the case. But it's always, at least I always tell my detectives as a sergeant, and even now, I always tell them, look, we can always reopen the case. Like if you close a case out
Yeah.
and 6, 8 months later, a year later, maybe a DNA hit comes through or whatever, then you have something to go on. So yeah, you would reopen the case. So I think it depends on your agency and also the type of case. If it's a lost credit card or a stolen credit card, and it's kind of, all right, well, I closed the card, whatever, that's one thing. But if it's a violent crime or a homicide or a kidnapping or anything like
Right.
that, obviously they would extend the life of those because of the severity of it.
Plus, you're hearing from the family, I would imagine.
Right. Yeah,
They're very
yeah,
active
it's more
typically.
Involved. Yep.
One of the facts I saw in this case that I'm curious to hear your thoughts on is, and of course, we sit here, the three of us, we have no idea who committed this crime. We have no judgment on anybody. We're not suspecting anybody. But the law enforcement in this case went to Savannah Guthrie's sister's home, her sister and her brother-in-law's home. They searched it. This was, very, very soon after the kidnapping. And they spent a number of hours there searching their home. And, my thought was, maybe they think that they had, because she didn't live, the mother, Nancy Guthrie, didn't live with her daughter and sister and son-in-law there. I thought, well, maybe they think they had something to do with it, or maybe they felt like they had a housekeeper in the home that might have saw an opportunity to do a ransom and kidnap the mother, wealthy family, or what have you. But from an investigative perspective, why do you think, and again, we have no inside information on this case, why do you think they might have searched the victim's children's home, daughter and son-in-law's home? Any thoughts on that?
Well, specific to that situation, without reading, the probable cause or the warrant, to see exactly, how they maintain that. But speaking generally, yes, if you receive information, and again, it could be from an unknown source, it could be physical evidence, it could be from a telephone, phone records or GPS locations or something to build up and support that. I don't know what specifically made him a target, the son-in-law, in this case. But working any case, if you have a lead, you're going to run on it. And, oftentimes the family maybe has knowledge, and that may have been another reason. Maybe they sought something that he had or the daughter may have had that could have helped. And maybe they weren't, I don't know, maybe they weren't cooperating, so they almost had to do a warrant. That could be a possibility too, without reading it.
What about polygraph exams, or people may call them lie detector exams? Is that something in your routine of investigating that you've asked witnesses, suspects, so forth to take a polygraph?
Yes, it's come up. As you guys know, the court interpretation or acceptance of those is very minimal, but it's come up. And it's definitely a strong tool. It's a tool to utilize if you have a specific suspect that you may like for a certain act or crime. It certainly would strengthen the case and show, once it shows that they're being untruthful, or it designates that they may not be completely forthcoming with what they've told you previously. It's a strong tool to use to develop a suspect or further, your investigation into one. Yeah.
And what do you think?
And I know when I was a prosecutor, and polygraph's been around a long time.
Mm-hmm.
So back then, sometimes we would do polygraphs and it would lead to a confession because you would confront the suspect with the fact that they failed a polygraph.
Right.
And then they would feel that maybe they have no way out, and they're
Exactly.
encouraged by good police work to make a confession. So it is a useful tool, but like you say, we can't use it in court.
Right.
So it's just an investigative tool.
It is, and to your point, yeah, that's primarily what at least in my opinion and my experience is the use of it is as to further enhance your investigation, if towards one suspect, or to help him or her maybe remember things that they didn't remember the first time.
Yeah.
So,
and just for our viewers and listeners to understand, something to be admissible in court, like a polygraph exam, it has to be presented to the court. The court has to determine that it's scientifically reliable, meaning it's whatever it represents is accurate and truthful. And so as of this moment in time, the science hasn't been able to be proven 100% scientifically reliable, but it's actually pretty darn close to being 100% reliable. And it's so close that it does become a valuable tool that we do it on the defense side a lot of times without law enforcement knowing. We'll say to our client as part of our strategy, you're suspected, you've been charged with this crime, they believe you did it. Hey, let's go privately take a polygraph exam and see how you do on it. Mm-hmm. And if they pass it, then we'll present it to law enforcement and the prosecutor and so forth. And hopefully they'll find it as persuasive as they do when they're investigating a case and ask someone to take a polygraph. What if they decline it? What does that mean to you? Like, you're shaking your head. It means nothing, right?
Well, yeah. I mean, I wouldn't take one. I mean, I especially if I was guilty. But even if I weren't, and the point you just touched on is the validity, and it's a machine and it's operated by humans. So there is a margin of error inherently in all of it. But no, if somebody doesn't take one, I mean, I think if you're asking somebody to take one, you have a strong suspicion that they are more involved than either they're telling you or you have enough evidence to prove their involvement. Some people just randomly say, "Oh, I'll take one." Right. And then, they've talked themselves into guilt. I mean, like you've probably seen that, right, where it's like, "Oh, I'll take one," and they take one and they fail. And then, they may end up admitting it or later be charged for that crime. And you're like, why would you agree to take it? So, it's.
Well, Guy, I've used them. I'm sure you have, in those rare cases where our client who is facing trial, we know that the chances of winning the trial are pretty slim. In fact, I call those cases weekend at Bernie's because I'm walking the corpse around the room during the trial.
Exactly.
And then, but the client is adamant and is telling some fantastic story that doesn't make sense. When I've asked the client to take a polygraph, sometimes as a means to get them to look at the reality of the situation and maybe entertain a reasonable plea as opposed to facing sudden death.
True.
So, but again, like you say, it's on both sides, it's an investigative tool, but really nothing more.
Right. Maybe one day they'll be admissible. Who knows? But they're not right now. So it makes me think of like DNA. When people say, "Should I give my DNA?" I always tell them DNA stands for "Do Not Acquit." It says, every jury, if it's your DNA, you're going down.
The mail-in stuff for DNA and other familial DNA, which is it's cool to trace your ancestry. But I've told my children, don't ever and hopefully you're not in this situation, but don't ever give your DNA without a warrant. Don't ever do that.
Right.
Because I never would.
By the way, I have a doormat at my house that says "Come back with a warrant." Literally, you're gonna have to come over and visit.
And I'm not. Listen, I'm not trying to be. I'm not a person that professes to be. In law enforcement this long and then try to deter. What works. But I'm just saying. There's certain things that they get classified, and I think certain things should remain private.
Absolutely. Right. That's our constitutional rights.
Right.
We're going to wrap up in a second. We'll have some final words from everybody. But before we do, I just want to say, this was such a great episode. We did not cut for our advertisement, which we usually do, our sponsor halfway through, Lang Realty, but we're appreciative of Lang Realty. We just didn't want to stop today. And also I want to remind everyone, all our followers, all our new fans, to please remember to follow us, subscribe to us, which is free, and to like us. So yeah, we really appreciate a good episode again today. Marc, any thoughts about the episode and about your going back on the slopes before we turn
No,
to?
I'm anxious to get back on the slopes, but
Okay.
I'm happy we did this because, Laz, you are a great guest and gave us some insight into how things work in these police departments. And everybody should know that everybody's human, but you guys are trying your best. And the fact that the case hasn't been solved yet doesn't mean that enormous effort hasn't been made. And just hope that you continue to rise within your department. Someday we'll have chief Laz here.
Maybe.
Okay.
About that. Yeah, we'll see.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
In any event, ladies and
Yeah.
gentlemen.
Wait. I want to hear Laz with some closing
Oh,
comments,
okay.
Marc. Yeah.
Okay.
Do you have any thoughts? Have you heard anything in the news? I know you're hearing the same stuff we are. You're just watching the news, reading the newspaper. Does your gut instinct telling you they'll solve it? Is your gut instinct telling you she's alive or not alive? Just kind of some closing thoughts on this.
Well, I think that, like Marc just mentioned, this case is, I could, without 100% certainty, but I can almost certainly say it's still being worked. And there's probably a lot of work going on that's not being publicized right now because it's kind of out. But by the same token, I don't know how often the sheriff or the FBI are giving updates, and they're just not really airing it as much as they did in the beginning also, so it's still probably progressing. I think it'll be solved. I mean, some of these cases, there's been kidnappings or people disappeared for months or years and have been recovered. Hopefully for her and her family, she's still alive. If it truly is a ransom situation, then she probably is. If it's just a random a targeted disappearance of a news person's mother. I mean, that's the information you find out down the road, after it's solved and you work it and you'll be like, what caused this whole motive,
Right.
And that's what's really interesting in cases like this, because there was really no indication why, at least to date that I know of, why she was selected, or, out of all the people in the entire world, we don't wish it on anybody, but why her, So I think it'll be solved. I think that they're working diligently and very hard every day. And I think, when the time is to release more information, they will, at least hopefully, it pans out
Do you think
positive.
there's a possibility that there have been additional ransom demands that the law enforcement agencies are not making public for investigative reasons?
Yeah, I think so. I think if it's, let's call it, I hate to go down these dark roads, but it's a fact of life and specific to this case. Let's say that, this is truly a ransom issue. Yeah, I think the person or persons involved may be directly communicating, because I'm guessing law enforcement has one or two people allocated with the family, and they may be as a go-between with the family, and they may directly be communicating with them. And it's very possible. Yeah, it's very possible. I mean, if that's truly the motive of this case, it would almost seem reasonable that it would be, because to date, except for one or two early on that were cryptocurrency, I don't think they've asked for anything since. So
The other thing, though, is that it has been reported that Nancy Guthrie was on very important medication, and that it's now been what? How many days?
Been 6 weeks or so. Yeah.
6 weeks.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
what's the likelihood that she'd still be alive if none of that medication was taken?
yeah,
And then the other thing that's been postulated, I know at this point we're just talking about theories that there's no way you can give a definitive opinion. But a lot of people also have been postulating that maybe it was a botched abduction and she was killed, God forbid, in the abduction, and that's why they haven't been able to find anything, or nobody's come forward. I mean, there's so many possibilities here. We just have to wait.
Well,
till-
by the way, as I know we're wrapping up, but just yesterday, the sheriff did give a statement that said that he believes this was a targeted kidnapping, and that law enforcement knows why the person did it. And that opens up a whole nother scenario of possibilities here, which might be episode 2 of this special edition with our Lieutenant Kimsel, right? So you're going to come back with us?
I would come back, sure.
Okay.
Very enjoyable.
Wonderful.
Awesome.
Wonderful.
All right, then. Until next time, Marc, you know our saying.
All right. You are free
Free to go.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Me too. See
You're
you
free
guys
to
later.
go.
Thank you.
Down Low Investigations is a sponsor of You're Free to Go. Behind every great criminal defense attorney is a great private investigator. That's why Marc and I use Down Low to investigate cases all over the country. Down Low can help you too, whether you're running a background check on an employee or running a background check on a blind date, or let's say you need someone followed or some other type of investigative work conducted. Down Low is the way to go. Call Download Investigations at 561-843-1806. Everything expressed and discussed in this episode are the opinions and experiences of attorneys Guy Fronstin and Marc Nurick and their guests. All ethical rules are complied with. Attorney-client privilege and confidential information is not shared or released during these episodes, and names, dates, locations, and other identifying information may be changed to protect confidentiality. Topics are embellished, and none of the statements made constitute legal advice and should not be considered or relied on as such.